So bonjour à tous. Hello everyone. Thank you for coming to Insomnihack, and thanks for the organizers for this great event. Thank you for hosting me. For the next hour, I will be talking about Kerberos shenanigans, and to take the words from Waldo, I will be talking about abuses and not bugs. So let's hope they just stay there in the long run. I just took his ID on the first slide. You will have the link to the deck. So if you need to take pictures or something, feel free to do so. But know this, you have the deck somewhere on the internet. So the talk is about Kerberos delegations and how to abuse the mechanisms of Kerberos delegations and service for user extension to bypass the limitation of Kerberos delegation. So this is all just quite some logic here. The contents of the talk will be as follows. Firstly, I will briefly introduce everyone to what is Active Directory in Kerberos, just a quick reminder. Then we will talk a bit about Kerberos delegations, the 3 or 5 main types of delegation you will find. And then I will make some detailed explanations of how these work and how the extensions and delegations work, what are the mechanisms behind those. And then I will talk about the abuses of S4U to proxy, S4U to self. And we'll wrap things up in the end by foreseeing some of the questions you may have, linking some resources and tools, and doing the conclusion. So without further ado, let's just break the ice together. My name is Charlie Bromberg, also known on Twitter as Shutdown, written on the reverse for the handle. I work at Capgemini, which I truly thank for the opportunity to come here. They allow me to do this research, or at least take the time to try all this and give me the context to try this during pen test engagements. You may also know me from some night jobs, which is the Hacker Recipes, which is a set of theoretical and practical methodologies. Again, just to take the words from Waldo, I just write what I wish I had read from the beginning. You also have other tools. I'm co-creator of Exegol, PyWhisker, Targeted Kerberos, and many other things. So let's start with Active Directory and Kerberos. Active Directory is a set of services that you probably all know. By a show of hands, who knows Active Directory and has worked with Active Directory in the past? Yeah, so that's a huge majority here. That's a good thing. In Active Directory, we find a lot of services. We just talked about Azure AD before, but one type set of services that we find usually is domain services. This one will stick. This one is here for decades, and it has some abuse capabilities. Some are known, and some are left to discover. In Active Directory, we have authentication mechanisms. To say the least, we have NTLM and Kerberos, which are the two main authentication protocols we find in Active Directory domain services. NTLM and Kerberos serve the same purpose, but they work in a really different way. NTLM works in a 3-way handshake, first with a challenge message, then with a negotiate message, first with a negotiate message, then the challenge, then the authentication message. And it works in a scheme based on a challenge response, where the response, also called the NTLM hash or net NTLM hash, is in fact derivated from the actual user's password hash. It's not really a hash. In this protocol, the domain controller usually decides if the user has the right or not to authenticate to the remote resource. I say usually because there are cases where the user is a local user on the server, and the domain controller doesn't have his saying in if the user has the right or not. Kerberos works a bit differently. It works based on tickets. These tickets, called TGTs and service tickets, are obtained through a first step that is called the pre-authentication step, which is optional, but I won't deep dive in this. It's out of the scope. But just to remind, it's based on tickets, yes, but at the beginning, it's also based on the long-term key, which is also derivated from the user's password. So it makes Kerberos and NTLM vulnerable to lots of things, lots of abuses, lots of bugs also. Here is a quick list of those. The aim of that list is not to say that Kerberos is more dangerous than NTLM. This would be wrong. This would be false. This slide just shows that there are a lot of paths to discover, to explore when attacking Kerberos. There are a lot of paths too for NTLM, but I mean, NTLM is really dangerous. It's really old. It's badly constructed, but Kerberos has its flaws too. And since this protocol is far less known than NTLM, it's far more subject to some abuses and attacks. If you want more information on when do these attacks occur, when are these abuses taking place during the authentication mechanism, you have a mind map on the left, on the right on this of the slide, which is accessible on the hacker recipes if you want to understand it clearly. So let's do some quick reminder of how Kerberos authentication actually works. Well, as I said earlier, you have a first step, which is the pre-authentication step, and this one, while it's optional, it really is the first step to grant a TGT for a user. I say it's optional because there is an abuse case called ASREP roast where you can disable the pre-authentication for a user. But in fact, this step is usually taking place and allows the user to make a request to the authentication service, the AS, that is located on the KDC, the Key Distribution Center, and it allows him to obtain a TGT. TGT stands for Ticket Granting Ticket. It's a ticket, but what does it do? It grants ticket. And it grants what types of ticket? Well, service tickets. So bear with me here. Usually you see on the internet that the acronym for service ticket is TGS. Well, it's not quite true. The TGS usually stands for the Ticket Granting Service. It's a service. It's not a ticket. The acronym for service ticket would be ST. And this is the acronym I will be using in this deck. But if you see TGS somewhere referring to tickets, this is quite normal. People usually tend to mix a few things, and with Microsoft parlance, it's quite common. So, the service ticket, what's its purpose? The service ticket's purpose is to allow the user to access a resource. In this ticket, you will find information about the service class, the service name, the service realm, and you will find information about the user as well. You will also find in that ticket and in the TGT as well, the PAC. The PAC stands for Privilege Attribute Certificate, and it's all the information regarding the user that the remote resource will unpack and check and verify to see if the user really has the authority and the privileges necessary to access the said resource. So, now that it's perfectly understood how Kerberos works, I really believe it now, let's talk a bit about delegation. So, Kerberos delegations, there are, let's say, two families. The first one is the unconstrained family, and the second one is the constrained family. Well, you can guess it from the name. Unconstrained means no limit. The Kerberos delegation is a mechanism allowing a service to access another service on behalf of a user. This is a legitimate behavior by Microsoft. There is no issue with this, but we'll see the different abuse scenarios later on. The unconstrained is no limit. The service configured for unconstrained delegation can act on behalf of another identity on a remote service, on any other remote service. The constrained one, well, it's limited. The first service configured for KCD, for constrained delegation, can act on a set of services. And RBCD, resource-based constrained delegation, is quite similar, but the other way around. And then, on the constrained delegation, there is a setting called protocol transition. When configuring an account for constrained delegation, you have the choice between using Kerberos only, which is without protocol transition, and use any authentication protocol, which is without protocol transition. So, here is here are some diagrams to better understand what are the behaviors and mechanisms behind Kerberos delegation. So as I said, the unconstrained delegation allows the service that is configured for it to act on behalf of another identity on any other service. There is no limit here. It's really dangerous. If this service gets pwned, the attacker will be able to act on any other user on, let's say, the domain controller services. When I say any other user, there is a limit here. The limit is the protected users and the users set sensitive for delegation. We will talk a bit later on, deep dive on this matter. Constrained delegation is the exact same thing, but instead of having the right to act on anyone's behavior on any service, it's only on the list of services. And then the RBCD, when I said it's the other way around, it's because instead of configuring the service that will delegate, we configure the service that is the target of the delegation. Instead of having an outgoing delegation with unconstrained and constrained delegation, we have an incoming delegation with RBCD. The difference here resides in the fact that unconstrained and constrained delegation require really high privileges on the domain. It's the SE-enable delegation privileges on the domain, which is close to domain admin rights. And the RBCD doesn't require those ultra high privileges. It only requires control over the service that we will configure for RBCD. And for example, computer accounts on the domain have the right to edit their own RBCD attribute that is called the MSDS, allowed to act on behalf of other identity. Thanks, Microsoft, for that. Now I have to drink a bit. Sorry for that. Yeah, so it doesn't require all that power on the domain to configure RBCD. So now that you have perfectly understood, I'm sure of it, the differences between unconstrained, constrained, protocol transition with or without, resource-based, constrained delegation, let's see how these work really. This is just, again, to quote Waldo from the talk before, we have to deep dive and go beyond the documentation to really understand what are the mechanisms of those protocols. Once we understand that, we should be able to find some abuses. Just a quick disclaimer here, the abuses that I will be talking about are not abuses that I have discovered myself. I'm just quoting a few other things that I found on the internet and put it all in a nice red and orange diagram for the theme. The unconstrained delegation works like this. A user first needs to obtain a TGT, and later on, when using that TGT to obtain a service ticket for a service, when the KDC will see that the service target for the service ticket is configured for Kerberos unconstrained delegation, which I will refer to as KUD, it does something really special. It delegates the TGT in the service ticket. So the user that sends his service ticket to the service configured for KUD has, in fact, its TGT delegated included in the service ticket. What this allows, it allows the service configured for KUD to actually extract the TGT from the user and act on behalf of the user with his TGT to access any other resource. While this works for any user, it doesn't work for the users set sensitive for delegation or put in the protected users group. That's the only limitation here. So let's do a quick SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What this allows is that you can, in fact, act as any other user with the limits I explained before. But the limit here is that actually, if the attacker obtains full control over the KUD, he won't be able to impersonate users out of thin air. He will require, the requirement here is to obtain an incoming authentication from a user, because without that authentication, the service will not receive the service ticket and hence will not receive the TGT of the user. So he won't be able to act as that user. There are workarounds to coerce the authentication the authentication of users. Sorry for that. For example, RPC abuses based on MS-RPRN, the printer bug, MS-EFSR, MS-FSRVP. There are lots of abuses. The attacker can also just sit and wait and see for users to access that resource, because usually this service is not configured for KUD for no reason at all. Usually users connect to that service. Constrained delegation is a bit similar in the way that it requires an incoming authentication from the user, but here the TGT is not delegated in the service ticket. Here, we will begin to talk about service for user extensions, which are extensions in the Kerberos mechanisms. Here, with constrained delegation without protocol transition, so when it's configured for Kerberos only, the user, when he obtains a ticket to access the resource, the ticket is a standard one, but when the service obtains that ticket, the service configured for KCD obtains that ticket, he includes that ticket in a TGS request, in a TGS rec, a request for obtaining a service ticket. And in that request, he will include an additional ticket and evidence that the user has in fact authenticated to the service. And this is called S4U to proxy, service for user to proxy. It's a request that allows the service configured for delegation to obtain a service ticket on behalf of another user to another service. While this allows the exact same thing, it allows the service to access another resource on behalf of another user. Here, the list of target resources like app02 are limited. It's configured on the account. And the requirement of having, you need the incoming authentication from the user is still here. With constrained delegation with protocol transition, sorry for that, it's a bit different. So while I'm sipping a bit of water, I'll let you find the differences, find Waldo, trouver Charlie en français, which is my name, the differences between the diagrams of without and with protocol transition. Okay, this was just an excuse because I was really thirsty. Okay, so the constrained delegation with protocol transition, as you can see, probably guess if you are too far away in the room, there is something missing here. It's the user. The user is not part anymore of the diagram. With protocol transition, you have, the service configured for KCD with protocol transition has the ability to impersonate users out of thin air. He doesn't need the incoming authentication from the user. And how does he do that? He does that by requesting an S4U to self now. We talked earlier about the S4U to proxy, which is a request allowing the service to obtain a ticket on behalf of another user to a remote service. S4U to self is quite similar. It allows the service to ask a service ticket to itself on behalf of another user. So S4U to self, in fact, is the only difference here in the mechanisms between with and without protocol transition for KCD. And then we have RBCD. I won't go into too much details here. What we have to understand and remind is, keep in mind, is that the RBCD mechanisms are quite similar to the KCD one. Instead of having an outgoing delegation, we have an incoming delegation when we take place from the app02, which is the one now configured for RBCD. But the process is the same. You can either, the service that wants to delegate can either wait for a service ticket from a user or get one with S4U to self. Now, I'm sure it's perfectly understood. You have all understood really 100% how delegation works. So let's now deep dive in something you wish you wouldn't have heard, service for user extensions. These extensions are, in fact, the mechanisms behind delegation. If you followed the explanations before, KCD is based on S4U extensions and RBCD as well. So let's now find the differences between S4U to self and S4U to proxy and understand how these work. And I promise this is one of the last explanations of this talk, and we will do some tests later on. So S4U to self, as I said earlier, allows a service to obtain a service ticket for itself, on behalf of a user. But while this concept is quite easy to understand, there are a few variables to take into consideration. The service ticket that is produced after the S4U self, that is sent by the KDC, by the key distribution center has one thing that is essential for S4U2 proxy. It's the forwardable flag. If the impersonated user is protected by any means, like it's set for sensitive for delegation, it's put in the protected users group, then the service ticket produced by the S4U2 self will exist. It will produce a ticket. However, the forwardable flag will not be included in the ticket. And what this does is that the S4U2 proxy will fail, because the requirement of the S4U2 proxy is to use an additional ticket in the request that was either produced by the S4U2 self or received during the incoming authentication from the user. And if that forwardable flag is not present in the ticket, then the S4U2 proxy will fail, and the KDC will say something like, come on, man, you don't have the permissions to do this. Shut up. Just no. But there is another thing. If the forwardable flag is not set, there is a specific scenario based on RBCD, which I will be explaining later on. Another thing is that the service ticket produced by the S4U2 proxy always have the forwardable flag set. And some of you might guess where I'm coming. If you manage to do an S4U2 proxy and include in the additional ticket a ticket produced by an S4U2 proxy, you know, S4U2 proxy produces its ticket used then by S4U2 proxy, then it will work because the flag will be present in the ticket. But we will see that later on. Everything stated here is just taken from the awesome and extensive blog post from Elad Shamir, which you can see on the right, wagging the dog. All the links will be in the deck. The link is already here. But do we really trust a random blog post on the internet? You shouldn't. Well, this is far from being a random blog post. I can assure you this takes months to digest. But let's say that for the sake of this talk, we will do the tests ourselves. So let's begin with the tests for S4U2 self. Let's say that our service is not configured for delegation, for any kind of delegation. Will the S4U2 self work? Well, the answer to that is yes, it works. But is the forwardable flag present in the ticket? The answer is no. So let's move on to the second part. What happens when the service that asks for the S4U2 self is configured for Kerberos constraint delegation without protocol transition? By a show of hands, who can really read that slide? No one. Okay, awesome. From the front rows, I can assume that either the ones on the four first rows don't really have. You need glasses. You need glasses. Okay, so the forwardable flag is not present in the ticket because here the service is not configured for protocol transition. It doesn't have it has constraint delegation without protocol transition, so the ticket issued by the service doesn't have the forwardable flag set. And for the majority who cannot read these slides, but they really are available online, you should see that in the ticket, somewhere right here, but you cannot see my mouse, you have the username domain admin stated in the ticket. It's the user I'm trying to impersonate, to act on behalf of. And then you have the target service, which is the service that asked the S4U2 self, because S4U2 self is obtaining a ticket for itself. Now, what happens if we switch from no protocol transition to with protocol transition? If you followed, you should have receive a service ticket after the S4U2 self with the forwardable flag set. And this is what happens exactly. On the first command of the slide, I used find delegation pi, which is a script of Impacket. I'm not so fond of PowerShell myself, so I'm using Python here. But you can see that, you can guess, trust me, that the service configured for delegation is configured with protocol transition. And what this does is that when calling the S4U2 self extension, the ticket obtained is configured with the forwardable flag. But then what happens if we keep the same configuration, but instead of asking S4U2 self to obtain a ticket as any other user, let's say that we want to impersonate a protected user, a user that it should be protected against delegation. Well, it's the same behavior for users set as members of the protected users group. or users that are set sensitive for delegation, it doesn't work. I mean, the S4U self works, but the forwardable flag is not set in the ticket. Now, what is the impact of all these tests I'm sure you found very boring on S4U proxy? Well, with no delegation, we obtained a ticket that didn't have the forwardable flag set, so it fails. The last line of the S4U proxy command shows that actually the service doesn't have the delegation right, because the ticket, in fact, doesn't have the forwardable flag set. Second use case, what happens with KCD, but the ticket issued by the S4U itself didn't have the forwardable flag set? Well, this happens because the KCD was configured without protocol transition. Well, S4U proxy fails again. But now, what happens if the service was configured for a KCD with protocol transition? The forwardable flag was set in the service ticket, which means that when used later on with the S4U proxy succeeds. And we see that the ticket obtained with S4U proxy is actually targeting another resource, a resource stated in the list of delegation of the accounts, acting as another user. And then there is another use case. I told you earlier that I would deep dive in RBCD. You probably are fearing that moment. That moment is coming. Winter is coming. It's here. The story of S4U proxy and RBCD. So we have a service configured for RBCD, and another service that is in this list is trying to obtain a ticket. So he's trying to obtain that ticket using S4U itself. Because that service is not configured for KCD with protocol transition, that S4U proxy S4U itself, it succeeds, but the ticket doesn't have the forwardable flag set. So if you followed the previous tests, it should fail, right? The S4U proxy should reject the request and say, come on, man, the additional ticket didn't have the forwardable flag set, so it doesn't work, but in fact it does. And why that? Well, let's see what Microsoft has to say about this, because here, in fact, the documentation is quite correct. We just have to read it and understand it and digest it. What it says is that actually, in order to accept an S4U proxy request, you either have to have the forwardable flag set on the service ticket used in the used in the request, or you have to have the RBCD bit set in the request. This bit is set by the client who's doing the request. So I was like, come on, man. If you have a forwardable flag that is not set in the ticket, can you, with your client, set the RBCD bit and then bypass all of this? Well, the answer is no. The KDC chooses that, and if the RBCD bit is set in the request, he will double check that the service does indeed is listed somewhere in the RBCD list of the target service. So I was wondering then, okay, but are we sure about that? Do the tools that we use really include that? Well, the answer is yes. Here is how Rubius works, which is the C# toolset to manipulate and work with tickets. And here is how Impact works. I won't go into the details because I think I don't have the time, but I trust you to do that homework later on. So now that you have all perfectly understood how the authentication works, how the delegation works, how the with or without protocol transition affects the mechanisms, and how the S service for user extensions work, let's talk a bit about abuses. I'll let you some time to digest that meme, which is, I think, of the highest quality ever. Okay, so all right, listen to this. Since S4U proxy produces a forwardable ticket, why not use S4U proxy to obtain a ticket that meets the requirements of S4U proxy? That is genius. I mean, for the people that understood that, because it took hours for me to understand and to digest. But let's see this together. We have three kind of scenarios we can tackle with. The first one is the RBCD trick. Let's say that the app02 is configured for KCD without protocol transition, meaning that the S4U itself will produce an unforwardable ticket. And let's say that we have control over that service. This means that we can configure RBCD on this machine because computers have this right themselves. And let's say we have control over another service, let's say app01. This is possible thanks to the great machine account quota domain level setting that is set to 10 by default that allows any authenticated user on the domain to create and join up to 10 machine accounts. Awesome. I don't know why this exists and it's not limited to admins, but okay, let's use that and abuse that. So the scenario is you have control over app02, which is configured for KCD. You configure RBCD on that. You have control over app01. You use app01 with the specific RBCD mechanisms to obtain a ticket with S4U2 proxy on behalf of another user for app02. And what will happen here is that from app02 perspective, you will receive something that really looks like a ticket produced by S4U2 self. But this ticket, since it's produced by RBCD's S4U2 proxy, will be forwardable. So you will be able to use this with S4U2 proxies for the KCD part. And it bypasses the whole I need the user authenticating to me requirement. So I had planned, or at least hoped, to make a demo, but there are a lot of concepts, and I think you are starting to be hungry. So let's jump right to the backup slides. The first slide here, you cannot see it, trust me. You have the service that is configured for KCD, Kerberos constrained delegation without protocol transition, that is trying to do an S4U2 self. It succeeds, but the ticket obtained is not forwardable. So the KCD service cannot impersonate users out of thin air. I mean, right now. But what happens if we create with add computer, the first command, we create a computer account called croissant, and then use that computer account to do RBCD? Well, the first step is to obtain an S4U2 self ticket. And you can see in the flags, trust me, that the flags here do not include the forwardable flag. But it doesn't matter, because as you've seen from Wolf Wiggum, this is special. We are talking here about RBCD. And RBCD doesn't really care about if the forwardable flag is set on the ticket produced by S4U2 self. So here, it's not forwardable, but it's forwarded anyway, thanks to RBCD. What happens is that we now have a second ticket, which is a ticket aimed at the service configured for KCD as another user with the forwardable flag set on. And it really mimics the mechanisms of S4U2 self. We now have a ticket that would be produced by S4U2 self with protocol transition. However, the service is not configured for protocol transition. It's configured without. It would require an incoming user authentication, but now it doesn't. And we can impersonate users out of thin air. We can use that ticket in the additional ticket part of the S4U proxy request, and now say, I want to act on the behalf of domain admin on SVO1, which is the actual target of this whole scenario. And then I use that ticket and showed that, in fact, it's usable with a secret dump, SAM, remote SAM and LSI dump. So the first scenario is really possible, but it requires the creation of another machine account. It requires the machine account quota set to 10, which usually is the fact when it's your client's first pen test engagement, but on the second try, you will not find that. So let's just do self RBCD. We do not need another computer account. Let's just say that app02 is configured for RBCD for itself. We can delegate to itself. And with this, we actually bypass the limitation of S4U2 self, which produces an unforwardable ticket that cannot be used with S4U2 proxy. With this mechanism, you can chain the first S4U2 self, then an S4U2 proxy to self, and then use that ticket to do the real S4U2 proxy to SVO1. And on the left, I just did the test and it works. And then you have the third scenario, which is double KCD. This is exactly the same thing as the RBCD trick. Just here, let's say we have an app01 that is under our control, and app02, which we control also. Let's say app01 is configured for KCD with protocol transition. The S4U2 proxy will work and will allow like our BCD trick, to obtain a ticket that mimics the S4U2Self on the APO2. And this will bypass the limitation of S4U2Proxy. Now, we have seen the abuses case of S4U2Proxy. Awesome. Are there any kind of scenarios and abuses we can do with S4U2Self? I'll let you guess the answer. The answer is yes. I wouldn't be talking about that if it weren't the case. So before talking about the abuses and the scenarios, let's just remind or understand a few things. The first thing is S4U2Self doesn't really take the delegation protection into consideration. I mean, it does, because it doesn't include a forwardable flag in the ticket, but it still produces a ticket, right? So wouldn't that ticket be usable and allow for local privilege escalation? Let's say you obtain a service ticket, you act as the service, and you obtain a service for yourself as a domain admin or a local admin. I mean, this would be an LPE, right? Well, the answer is yes, but no, because the ticket is issued for a service that is not valid. The service is actually the name of the account that did the request. But there is another thing. The service name is not protected in the ticket, and you can change it. And will there be a check about that? The answer is no. You should be able to modify the service name, the SNAME, the SPN included in the ticket, and make that ticket valid and usable. And this is what I did here. Again, you cannot read it. Trust me. In the first ticket, the service name is, if I remember correctly, self-pc-kcd$, which is not valid. But let's say that we want to use that ticket. Well, let's just, substitute that SPN and change it, because it's not protected. And it works. So, we have two scenarios. The first one is an LPE primitive, and the other one is the stealthier silver ticket. This is not really a lateral movement thing. It's only a persistent thing, but if you like to stay stealthy, you'll like that one. In order for the LPE primitive to work, the first step is the TGT delegation trick. This relies on the fact that Microsoft virtual accounts, like default app pool or the network service accounts on a Windows machine, can indeed, on the network perspective, act on behalf of the machine. So if you use Rubius, which has a TGT delegation trick included in its features, you can indeed obtain a TGT for the machine account. And the machine account doesn't have admin's privilege to itself, but what it does, it actually handles the authentications and the access to the services that it handles. So you can, when you have knowledge about the service key, the long-term key of a service, you should be able to do a silver ticket and access that service with a forge pack and say you are, let's say, a local admin. Well, this works a bit similarly. You obtain a TGT, use that TGT to make an S4U2Self, and say, okay, I want a ticket to myself as another user, let's say, a domain admin. Well, this works. The forwardable flag is not set in the ticket, but we don't care, really, in fact, because we don't use S4U2Proxy. What we want to have access to is not a remote resource. It's the resource itself that did the, we want local privilege escalation, so it works. But what happens when you try to do this with a user sensitive for delegation or a protected user against delegation? S4U2Self is, if I remember correctly, a delegation extension. An extension linked to delegation, so it shouldn't work, but it does. If you request an S4U2Self with a sensitive admin, protective admin, or something like this, and let's say in the same command you do the SPN substitution, the TGS sub, well, you will obtain a ticket that is valid, that doesn't have the forwardable flag set on, but we really don't care, and that is usable. So we do use it. And in the last command, you see that I escalated from default app pool with a web server installed on the service to local admin, and I dumped the SAM and LSA hashes. And this is not a bug. This is an abuse. So just, again, this will stay in the long run. There is another scenario. It's stealthier silver ticket. If you know the long-term key of a service, you should be able to construct and forge a ticket with a pack stating that, let's say, your user is part of all the groups of the domain admins and it has the 500 RID or something like this. The only thing is that it's not really stealthy because it's not stealth or stealthy, I don't know. The thing is that primitive is quite known and it's monitored all the way, usually. But what about S3 S3 is far less known, not monitored as much, and it has a legitimate pack in the ticket. It's a real ticket issued by the KDC. So why not use it instead of a silver ticket? Well, the answer is yes, use it. Okay, so let's wrap things up. I hope some of you have questions, but I don't like to be surprised, so I try to guess a bit of those questions. I guessed 3 of those. The first one is, okay, Charlie, you explained to us that the SPN is not protected in the ticket and we can change it. But how about the forwardable flag? The forwardable flag is the requirement for S3 to proxy to work, right? So if we take a ticket, edit that forwardable flag, which is not in the encrypted part of the ticket, it should work. And the answer is yes. No, it worked for a while because that CVE was disclosed in 2021, and now this is patched, so it doesn't work anymore. Now the KDC makes additional checks to check that indeed you should have a forwardable flag set. Okay, now you should have a second question: how to mitigate all this? How to protect against this? Well, don't take my word for it. Just take Microsoft's one. You just have to understand that S4U self and S4U proxy extensions are really dangerous, and you just only have to protect all your services that use those like you would protect your KDC, your domain controller, of course. Why didn't I think about that? Yeah, that is rich. Okay, so last questions. Usually this question is turned the other way around. People like Waldo infuriate me because they always use PowerShell, which I don't really like because I don't understand it. So how can we use this from Linux? Well, that would be petty of you because I showed you how to exploit it from Linux, not from Windows. I assume this would be your question, so I made a quick equivalence table between the tools available from Rubius and the tools available from Inpacket. So now you have this, and you have also this. I did the effort here. I did the homework. I tackled a bit with Rubius. I never do. So that is probably why it's not readable, because I don't want you to see what I did. You will see in the online slides. I just did the double KCD scenario with Rubius. It works. It's just too small for you to read, and it is great for me. So this is the end of the foreseeing questions. We can now get to the acknowledgements part. Really, again, if you are interested by this and if you are not asleep yet, just wake up. And now you can see all the links and resources I used and the ones I quoted, like Elad Shamir, that wrote, again, an extensive and undigestible blog post about this. Everything is written here, there, with Rubius. So if you want to see what it's used, how we can abuse this with Linux, go back to my slides. And then we have articles about S4U, about Kerberos, that Will Schroeder, Dirk Jan, Charlie Clark, Snowcrash, and Pixis wrote, and these are awesome articles. If you want the links, here they are. I also included my own links, you know, shameless self-plug. You have the links from the Hacker Recipes, which is the blog post and website I hope I had found when I started my journey into Active Directory. You will also find you will not be able to understand these mind maps because I'm not able to understand them myself, even if I made them myself, but here they are. And if one day you find yourself tackling against delegation, you have those mind maps that tell you step by step what to do in each scenario. Also, I included a glossary because when people call an NT hash an NTLM hash and call an NTLM response an net NTLM hash, I mean, everyone is just fed up with this. Don't call a service ticket a TGS. This is the service. Well, the glossary is here. I mean, my glossary, at least. For the tooling, you have all the list of the tools I used and want to highlight in these slides. You have find delegation, get TGT, get ST, describe ticket, ticket converter, and so on, which are script examples you can find on Impacket. If you want to do these tests yourself, just keep in mind that there are still some of my pull requests that are pending. Everything is not merged yet, but you can do those merges yourself and use those tools. If you do not want are too lazy to do those merges yourself, you can use Exegol, which is my Docker container, multi-container. I mean, it's perfect. It replaces completely Kali Linux, which I find really, really great. And you also have Rubius, Bloodhound, and the hacker recipes in the list. Are there any questions left for you to ask me? Please do not corner me. I don't know a thing.
I think we'll start by thanking you for the talk. That's very good.
Hey, hi. Thank you for the talk. Nice talk. So I have a question which regards like this privilege escalation. So do you think with the data and information you leak, it will be possible to make a ransomware out of this vulnerability?
Should I answer that question? I'm not really sure. First of all, buongiorno. Grazie. I guess so. I think if you have access to the service, if you know the key, the only limit here is that for the LPE trick, you really do need to have access to the machine for the TGT delegation trick. But if you know the service key, the machine account key, you should be able to generate silver tickets. Equivalents to silver tickets. You should do the yes for you to self yourself. But if you do not know that key and need the TGT for the yes for you to self, you would need an access to the machine, which is not really that convenient for ransomware perspective.
Okay. Well, a little bit of work to do, but
for who? Answer me, for who?
Yeah. Do you know if it's possible to make a use case based in order to detect those attacks based on the Microsoft event logs?
I guess so, but my experience and knowledge about this is close to the ground, so I have no answer for you. But I guess so.
Okay.
I guess you could maybe put some triggers on the calls for extensions as for yourself as for your proxy. I guess.
Hi, thanks a lot for your talk. I had a question about whether this applies only to Kerberos for Microsoft, or would it apply, like, would these extensions exist elsewhere?
If I remember correctly, but I'm not really sure about that, I think those extensions are Microsoft products, but I'm not really sure. This is a great question because I wonder what would happen in environments that implement Kerberos without having the Microsoft ecosystem. It's a really great question, and I don't have a particular answer to that, but I will do the research. I didn't think about that.
Thanks for the great talk. I have two questions. The first one is, do you know why as for you to self works kinda for the accounts that are protected? Why is the ticket returned in the first place? Is there any legitimate cause for that?
If you're talking about the point that Waldo made earlier, that is understanding the intent, I do not know. I don't know why the S for yourself still produces a ticket that is not forwardable. I have really no idea. If I remember correctly, it's a feature by Microsoft because it allows the Microsoft virtual account to really act on behalf of other services. But that's my guess. I'm not sure. I don't know. If there's anyone from MS here,
Thanks. And the second question is, do you know of any way to remove the user has to authenticate to the service requirement for the unconstrained delegation as you did for constrained? Is there any way that you know?
Yep, I wondered that myself, because since unconstrained delegation is, like its name implies, unconstrained, and you can target any service, it's a very great question. Let me get back to the slide. Yep, so the answer is no, because unconstrained delegation doesn't rely on S4U extensions. It relies on a TGT delegation. When the user wants to access the service that is set for unconstrained delegation, there is no S4U to self, there is no S4U to proxy. The TGT of the user is in fact packed and put into the service ticket for the service. And when the KUD service will receive that ticket, he will unpack it, take the TGT, and use that TGT as if it was his own.
So in a way, unconstrained delegation is safer in this regard. Kinda.
I didn't. No. I mean, in a sense, yes, because you would need another requirement, which is the coercion, the authentication coercion of the user you want to impersonate. But I mean, this exists. You have Printerbug, which relies on an abuse of MSRPRN. You have MSEFSR. You have MSFSRVP to coerce machine authentications. And then you have lots of other mechanisms to poison and spoof in the network, like LLMNR, ADI-DNS, DHCPv6. You have lots of those. So usually obtaining an authentication is not really the biggest issue there. Don't use unconstrained delegation.
Thank you for the great talk. Do you have any recommendations on how to defend against this other than just protect your services?
Wait a bit. Here you go.
Yes. Do you have any other than the big red box?
I'm just messing with you, man. I have no idea. I like to abuse things. I don't like to protect them. Let me think about that. Remove the 10 value of the machine account quota to prevent users from creating machine accounts. Set a trigger, an event log when authenticated users with standard privilege create a computer account, and maybe do some behavioral analysis when RBCD is chained with KCD right after, when there are two delegation implied with the same service. There should be something wrong here. But that's my take. I'm not the one who defends.
All right, great. Thanks again, Charlie.
Thank you for listening.